Hello, everybody. I am here to walk you through the lecture for this week, Chapter 3 about poverty. All right, let's get started. So, this lecture is going to have two videos. It just was going to get a little bit long otherwise. So, make sure that you watch both parts. Okay, so defining poverty, first of all. Before we get into this too much, I just want to point out that this, like a lot of the subjects that we cover, can be a little bit triggering because it's difficult to talk about some of these issues without feeling like there's some stereotyping going on. I'm hoping that what we can do is we can have kind of an honest conversation about what is true and backed up by data versus what is fueled mainly by stereotypes. So I'm really looking forward to having some of that conversation, especially in this week's assignment. Okay, so defining poverty. There are two different ways to define poverty. Neither of them are perfect. So absolute poverty is a very simple way to define it. It's basically, above this amount of money, you're not in poverty. Below this amount of money, you are in poverty. Um, Relative poverty uses comparisons. So couple of things about this. Poverty in the United States looks very different than it does in developing nations. Relative poverty, if you think about developing nations and what poor folk look like in some developing nations, sometimes they're very, middle class people look like people in the United States who fall well under the poverty line. So, relative poverty is tricky. And also within the United States, we live in the Bay Area, and what what amount of resource would work for us to live in the Bay Area and to be comfortable is a different amount of resource that would work in another part of the country that doesn't have such a high cost of living. That also feeds back into absolute poverty, right? So hold on a second. All right. So regarding absolute poverty, this is how the United States defines poverty. It does it in an absolute way. And these are the numbers from 2017. I'm actually not aware of whether they've changed or not. But the point is that we define it in this country in an absolute way. And that can be problematic, right? Because again, we live in the Bay Area. There's no universe in which four people can get by on $24,600 a year in the Bay Area. I don't see how the numbers crunch on that. And there's also like, if one person is in poverty, if they make 12,000 or they have an income of $12,060, then how does it work that four people can get by on 24,600? And like the actual explanation is, you live together, you only have one rent or one mortgage or whatever. I understand that, but I don't think that in the practice of living, it actually works out in that way. So, poverty guidelines don't work great in an absolute way when you are living in a high cost of living area, San Francisco, New York City, whatever. They don't work great when you live in a low cost of living area either. I don't see how four people can get by on that amount of money, no matter where you live. But it's much greater a disparity when you're looking at a high cost of living area. Okay, so just some statistics here. If these come up on your test, they're easy for you to look up. Just by coming back to the slide. If you think about this, you know, 1 out of every 7 people, 14% of people are living in poverty. That's quite a bit. And I would be curious to know in the area in which we live, what the percentage is, right? So, what's the percentage in San Francisco? What's the percentage in Oakland? What's the percentage in Moraga? You know, like we I think that they would be very vastly different in all of those places, and I would be curious to know what those are. Okay, so 19.7% of children lived in poverty. That's 1 out of every 5 children, almost, right? So that is a lot of children. And when you drill down into the statistics, almost a third of female-headed households live in poverty. So what does this mean, right? Um, we're gonna talk about that in 1 second, but let me just cover this first. So poverty over the decades, right? If you look at it, it hasn't really changed much, right? It hasn't changed much since the 60s. You know, like yeah, the 60s 17%, you know, the 2000s 13%, but this is not a huge difference. But then, is it different when you look at breakdowns? Well, you know, not really, right? So again, back to the children, you know, when we're looking at the subgroup of children, again, the numbers haven't changed much. I mean, it's higher for children, right? We just discussed that, but it hasn't really changed a whole lot. So like we're saying, people living in poverty are likely to be children and live with one adult who is a woman. What is that about, right? So if you think about that, you know, children obviously they don't have their own income stream, um, and you know the thing about women is there's a lot of structural misogyny out there in the world. First of all, the women tend to make less than men. They when children come along, it tends to be their career that takes a hit. That sort of thing. I mean, there's a lot of structural issues in our country that feed into this. Um, when I think about my own life, so if you remember back to my introduction post, I have an infant. Well, she's not an infant anymore, she's a toddler. And this is work that I am fortunate to be able to do while she is napping. She is literally napping right now as I record this, right? So this is a flexible work solution that I am able to do while around my parenting requirements. Well, my partner, works full time, and I do all the childcare while that's happening because I'm the one with a flexible solution, right? And my partner is not. So a lot of households work that way. Um, Not everybody is fortunate to have a job where they can work flexibly from home the way that I'm working right now, right? So not everybody is able to do that. What happens to essential workers who work in grocery stores? We can't do that work from home, right? So then you end up in a situation where you have to pay for daycare, or you have to work fewer hours or whatever. It becomes very clear very quickly how the whole structure falls down, especially if you're single, right? So that 28% number, that almost 1/3 of woman-headed households that are living in poverty, you can see how that ends up being possible, right? Okay, so again, this is more about what we were just talking about. It's this is a topic that you can, many books have been written about, and many dissertations have been created on this topic. This is something that has many contributing factors, but the bottom line is, um, juvenilization and feminization of poverty is a real phenomenon. Okay, so make sure that you go on to the second part of the lecture. The lecture is not over. There's still more slides. Do not stop here. Thank you.